I get that DPS is a large entity. So I'm just trying to figure out a solution to the problem, not to create a new problem, because
Right.
I think we did in 2014, created a new problem.
I would say this, today, as I sit here, I don't report to DPS. They provide administrative support to me. So I don't report to them. I guess technically I report to both the people and the governor, but I do not report to them. I receive administrative support from them, and so I'll leave it to you all's judgment as to how you might restructure, but I totally agree with you, ma'am, that there should be checks and balances here. I'm not suggesting that my successor become the king of the SBI and not accountable to anybody, or queen. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Representative McNeely, you're recognized for a series of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schurmeier,
Yes, sir.
appreciate you coming here today. I'm going to cut through a lot of crap, excuse my language. So Roy Cooper, then AG, was head of the SBI theoretically, because it was in the Department of Justice, for maybe like 12, 13 years. And most of the department was probably put in place then, probably by Bev Perdue, because it sounds like it's a government appoint, or easily possibly, whichever two. That would have spanned about probably a total of 12 years or more. And then Roy Cooper becomes governor. So in the meantime, in that period of time when he was not AG, or he still was AG and not governor, you were appointed by Pat McCrory, and I'm doing a lot of history that Representative Dow did, but I think this needs to come out. So I guess it sounds like to me there's a cultural war going on. New boss, new sheriff, whatever you want to call it, comes to town. And what was the attitude that you received upon being appointed to the SBI and being moved all of a sudden out from underneath the Justice Department, I guess? I want a little more latitude, if I can, Mr. Chairman. I want to hear about feelings, because I think feelings are important in this situation, because it's how you felt this situation was going that maybe alluded to what was happening. And I feel like from your checkered career, no, I shouldn't say checkered, but a very well done career, I don't believe you had any of these complaints ever filed on you before, but all of a sudden with this staff that you have and the people under you, now all of a sudden, you know, it appears things are different, but are they really? So maybe just allude a little bit, how difficult was this culture that you stepped into after a long period of time, the SBI going in whatever direction they were?
Well, I appreciate the question, and
It's a long question, but how'd you feel like this went down?
So, just to be sure, I started with the agency in 2016.
Right.
Prior to that, prior to 2014, it was in the Department of Justice, as you referenced. And from 2000 to 2014, Governor Cooper was the Attorney General there, and he appointed the previous directors, who were good people, I would add. But when I got there in 2016, I found an agency that was risk averse, that didn't want to make waves. The agents were, let me say again, significantly underpaid. There was no additional sworn staff for a period of a decade or more. And I can tell you what, you know, it's hearsay, but I can tell you what the agents told me, if it's appropriate.
Go ahead, I think it is.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So I've spoken with agents who were there for a period of 20, 25 years, and they felt like under Department of Justice the focus was on attorneys. So any new or additional money went in support of attorneys, and hence they went without pay raises for substantial periods of time. As I said before, their training was stale and uninspired. They were challenged more militaristically than they were collegially. We had sworn agents riding a desk. I saw the new agent selection process, and it was I just was very disappointed the draft day. There was a lack of diversity at the executive levels and nominal efforts at best to innovate and lean into the future. So I came along, and within 7 to 9 months, sir, I shook that agency about as hard as you could shake it. I made substantial changes in executive staff. It became more diverse and more into taking appropriate advancements into the future. This was no longer a risk averse. We created things like the Behavioral Threat Assessment Program, the Center for the Study of Use of Force. Use of force is a big thing around the state and around the country. We took it on as an important aspect to study it and figure out what's going on and how can we reduce it. So, the previous administrations were able to help influence and select the assistant directors and the general counsel and folks like that. Some had histories back to Department of Justice when I got there. I came in with 12 years of private sector experience from the city of Charlotte. And they didn't know me, I didn't know them. So I made judgments based upon 7 to 9 months and redirected the agency strategically. And I don't want this to be lost in all the discussions that we have. We're losing 10 to 12 North Carolinians a day. 10 to 12 a day. They don't need to die. And our agency is helping and can help to stem that tide. And we did that by using technology and going after the cartels. And I hope you stand with me that we're gonna take the cartels and we're gonna teach them a lesson when they come to North Carolina. I hope we get that sort of support. So at the time, our drug efforts were nominal at best. I mean, we did some good work, but it wasn't where we are today. We're third in the country in wiretaps now. I did change it. And we're now far less risk averse. We look at technology and we don't run from it, we embrace it. And we've made substantial improvements over the past few years, and I'm very proud of what our agency has done and what our agents have done.
Follow-up.
Recognized for a follow-up.
You know, I always think some of the best preachers are the ones that step on toes, but a lot of people don't feel that way. They don't like their toes stepped on. I'm thinking you stepped on some toes, and I think unfortunately that part of the congregation bit back at you. Now, that's just a personal opinion that I have as you come before us today. I don't think the SBI or any law enforcement agent should be politicized like what's happening. And I think this is just another example of trying to keep these independent agencies, independent minds that are allowed to do their job and not be influenced one way or another. I think this is a perfect example of what we see happened here when things go wrong. Obviously, the Good Old Boys Club didn't like what you did. I don't know exactly where we go from here, but there's definitely a problem that has to be fixed if we're going to have a completely fair and honest law enforcement agency that covers our whole state. And I appreciate you coming out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. And I might add one thing, Mr. Chairman. When Governor McCrory, we sat down and he said, I'm going to nominate you. And I said, Mr. Governor, you couldn't nominate somebody that knows less about the legislature than me. I don't even know my own senator and representative. And he said, you know what, that might work to our advantage. And over a period of a couple of weeks, I got to meet 120 of you. We walked a lot of stairs and a lot of miles in a couple of weeks' time and got to meet a lot of you. And through the years, I've come to know a lot of you, and I can't say enough about the support that you've been to the men and women of this Bureau, the pay that you've provided them and the personnel. You know, in the last 3 years, we've gotten 16 agents. That doesn't sound like a lot, but to us, it's monumental. 16 agents, and when you go a decade or more without receiving a single sworn agent, that's a long time. Crime changes and things happen, and we had to play from behind. We had to come from behind.
Well, thank you. Sir. Representative Cleveland, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm intrigued. You're an independent agency, but yet the governor and the Department of Public Safety try to run your business. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, sir. They influence.
I have a couple independent agencies. And let me ask you this. Has any legislative group ever talked to you about your independence and what we can do for you?
No, sir. I've gone to the legislature. Representative Cleveland, I've come here, I've met with different legislators since probably 2017 about our independence. This is not a new thing for me. I've come over here and spoken with people. And the point that I made then and I make now is that please finish the job you started in 2014.
I thoroughly agree with you. It's a shame I wasn't in the JPS area because I have some independent people, and I assure their independence and make sure that they understand that they're independent. When the governor or anyone else tells them that you can't do that, you got the prerogative of saying, sorry, I don't work for you. And that's what you need from what I hear here. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Talk to those people about legislation to improve
Previously.
your independence and strengthen it?
Previously, I have, yes, sir. We came up with there's 6 positions that we think, if we were granted those, and I think it's between 600,000 and 700,000 recurring, that we could operate. And those figures, I look back in our files and I found formal representations going back to 2019 where we've shared things with various people.
All right. If you come to me looking for positions for independence, I'd say see you later.
Yeah.
But, you know, actually, if you got your independence without someone sticking your fingers in your game, would that improve your ability to do your law enforcement business?
Could you repeat that, Representative?
If you got your independence where nobody was trying to guide you, would that improve your law enforcement performance?
Well, I think it would, but again, Representative Cleveland, I'm not here suggesting that there aren't checks and balances for us.
No.
I get that.
The General Assembly is the one that should be overseeing you as an independent agency, whoever you answer to in the General Assembly. So you got a check and balance.
Yes, sir.
But my question is, if you have your absolute independence, would that improve your performance as a law enforcement agency?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Quick, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is to you as chair. Walking in and I heard our director read his fabulous CV and give us his background, and I was wondering, what is this all about? And I had no clue what it was about. I actually thought at some point you were coming to say you were retiring, and I'm saying, well, why is that coming up to us? But did we have any idea beforehand that this was going to be the request?
Representative Quick, I think during my opening statement, I read out that due to the sensitive nature of the testimony, that it was all members were just told today when that would be happening. So what we just wanted to make sure we had an introduction today, and at the end of this, we will see whether it merits a follow-up, which we will operate absolutely going forward different. Just due to the sensitive testimony today, we wanted to make sure that our witness felt comfortable coming here and talking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have some questions for you, and with the allowance of the chair.
Recognized for a series of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you have done. As I said in my comments to the chairman, your CV is absolutely impressive. I have, my son-in-law is in law enforcement, and one of my best friends is in law enforcement, so I have tremendous respect for law enforcement on every level. And so, as I ask these questions, please know that it is with the utmost of respect for law enforcement in general and you. But specific to today, I want to ask these questions.
Yes,
you
sir.
had mentioned that you had been accused of racial discrimination, and you denied that.
Right.
But then you said you were asked to resign. Is there a connection between those two, as far as you can determine?
Yes, sir. I believe there is. The point that was made to me was that it would look bad, and it would be best if you just resign.
And you mentioned also that you were asked twice, if I kept correct notes here.
Yes, sir.
But both those times were in the fall of 2022.
October and November, yes, sir.
Thank you. And you were also, and I'm using your word here, you felt that you were threatened, that's your word in quotation marks, with an investigation. Has that investigation taken place?
As of yesterday, we have not been notified by the general counsel that they have started an investigation.
Do you know what the nature of the investigation would have been or is going to be?
I've been told not to go into the personnel matter.
Thank you. I can respect that.
Yes, sir.
For 6.5 years, for 6.5 years, you've served as director.
Yes, sir.
And in 6.5 years, have you ever made this request before?
Well, yes, sir, through the years, and I've looked through the files and found something officially dating back to 2019, where we were petitioning various members, but I believe it goes back to 2017.
You petitioned various members individually, as a group, but you've never came before this type of committee.
That is correct, yes, sir.
So, again, with all due respect, is this request to sever from the current organizational setup, is this personal to your situation, or is this best for the department?
I believe it's best for the agency, sir. Reverend, I would say this, that that the agency is tethered to DPS now. And I think that tethering tends to confuse people, both the public and law enforcement, and even within DPS, and for that matter, SBI. I think with very little effort and nominal expense that we can create a State Bureau of Investigation that is totally independent. And that's why I'm here, sir.
Thank you for your answers, and again, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Reverend.
Co-Chair Warren, you are recognized for a follow-up.
Mr. Director, I've got a little bit of an HR background, so I'm kind of fascinated with these exempt positions working for or with you, under you, however you want to look at that. Well, I'm going to go back to your October 3rd meeting, the first meeting you had where you were meeting with the Chief of Staff, Kristi Jones, and General Counsel Eric Fletcher, and they asked you to resign or suggested that you resign. Did you share that with your General Counsel?
She was gone that week, but she came back the next week, and at some point I did. Yes, sir, I did.
And, sir, what was her response?
Not much of one.
Okay. And I apologize because I had a hard time hearing Representative Cleveland's question, but heard something about not working for you. Maybe you could clarify what that question was? I guess what I think I heard was that someone said they did not work for you, they didn't work directly for you?
There was a comment made by the general counsel at one point that she was reminded that she worked for the governor.
And who reminded her of that?
We have a debate in our recollections who said what, but it was we don't debate over that it was a staff member from the governor's staff.
No, did she share that with you when she was told that at that time?
Yeah, I recall one name. She recalls a different name, but both names were staff members at the time with the governor's staff.
Thank you, sir. I know a question was brought up on checks and balances regarding that, and I think that can be satisfied if we refer to General Statutes 143B-13 through -926. I think if anyone interested in checks and balances regarding this position would probably get some clarification there. Thank you very much, Mr. Director.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Arp, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Director Schurmeier. As an appropriator, I can certainly understand the challenges that's facing regarding recruitment and retention. Can you address, how the difficulties in SBI regarding recruitment and retention and what you've done about it?
Thank you for that question. It's, since the George Floyd incident and what's gone on in our country since then, there's been a concerted effort to, in some cases, demoralize law enforcement generally and specifically in cities and towns and across the country. And I serve on the Criminal Justice Training and Standards Commission. And one of the statistics that we monitor is how many young people, actually it could be middle-aged people or maybe people as old as me, that enroll in basic law enforcement training in the state. And I can tell you, you can see a precipitous drop in the number of people enrolling in basic law enforcement beginning about the time of the pandemic. We peaked, I want to say, around 2020 with about 2,100 people enrolling, approximately, maybe 2,200. And last year, the number dropped to 1,700. So consider for a minute, as big as our state is, 10.6 million plus or minus, 1,700 people enrolling in basic law enforcement training for a year. But as you begin to do a background, you find out they can't pass the polygraph, they can't pass the background and things like that. So it is, Representative, Mr. Chairman, it is, people are looking at the pay because those young people that are out there today, I'm told, and my daughter is one of them, so I sort of understand this generation. They look for the money and the benefits, and in some cases, they're not loyal necessarily to an agency or a profession. So, and I don't mean to overgeneralize that, please don't misinterpret, but when you're competing for those people like that, pay and benefits matter. When you take away, for example, medical benefits after retirement, which doesn't apply to me, I might add, so I'm not arguing on that behalf, but they understand things like that, and pay matters. So I know that we have proposals, I'm sure you're aware of it, to try and keep us competitive against the Charlottes and the Winston-Salems and the Greensboros and the Durhams that not only offer competitive pay, but bonuses. They're offering bonuses, which we don't offer. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, no, that's your perspective on the challenges there that we know is out there. How diverse was the SBI when you took over?
Well, I can account for the executive staff, the people that reported to me. It wasn't very diverse. I think I mentioned that I reduced people in rank and allowed others to retire. And I filled those with 1 white male, 1 white female, 2 black males, including a black male to the first black male to head ALE, Alcohol Law Enforcement. In 2018, I promoted a white male and a white female. In 2020 to AD, to Assistant Director. And then in 2020, I promoted a black female to Assistant Director. And in 2021, a white male and a black male to Assistant Director. Can I add for the record, because diversity is important? During my term, I've promoted 48 white females. This includes sworn and non-sworn, so, because we have a sizable number of non-sworn people. We have 181 non-sworn and 270 sworn. During my term, I promoted 48 white females, 15 black males, 21 black females, 1 Asian male, 2 Hispanic males, and 5 Hispanic females. Now again, that's sworn and non-sworn ranks. I also drafted, I think I mentioned this, on my own, I drafted a diversity and inclusion plan in 2020 and shared it with the governor's office. That program is now led by an African-American female, and the tenets of that program include promoting minority participation in leadership development, expanding the SBI internship program, which feeds our sworn ranks, enhance diversity recruitment, conducting implicit or unconscious bias training. We're going to start that next week. And we created a diversity advisory committee.
Recognized for follow-up? Thank you. Representative Cunningham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Director.
Thank you, ma'am.
You answered some of my questions on the diversity and the inclusion, but since we're in this space and we're hearing a testimony,
Yes, ma'am.
that's what we're hearing from you, I wanted to go back to the discrimination and the racial issues. Moreover, after the George Floyd incident, what changes was made under your direction within your department?
Well, one thing, we created the Center for the Study of Use of Force because we didn't want George Floyd to happen in our state. And the intent there was to advance the tenets of what am I thinking of the word? It would be de-escalation, but it's bringing to the public eye more about use of force. One of the things that I talked about and contemplated is some kind of public website where people have visibility. That's what I wanted, visibility into the issues, because I would tell you in all my years of law enforcement, the media gets to define use of force. So they can be accurate, they can also be inaccurate. And I wanted to get rid of the inaccurate. I wanted to deal with facts. So we talked about visibility and we talked about accountability. That was one of the main things that came out of George Floyd. We also, during that time, let's see who I promoted. Since George Floyd, around that time, the African-American female to AD, and I promoted a white male and an African-American male to AD. So the Center for the Study of Use of Force, I would point to, and that was included in the Governor's Executive Order 145. I think it was June of 2020.
follow up, Mr. Chair, and it's not a question to the director, but more so a question to the chair.
Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're hearing the testimony of the director. Will there also be a testimony coming forth from the governor's office to this committee?
You are going to love my closing statements. Yes, we're going to. Yes, we'll ask it. Anyone mentioned in this, we will extend an invitation to. But we'll cover that more a little later in the meeting. Thank you. Representative Dahl, you're recognized for a follow-up.
So I'm still, I'm trying here. You have asked before the General Assembly to help you by moving your department somewhere else. Is that correct?
I've approached individual members, yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you've approached individual members. And I'm going to be political since my friend opened up the can. The Republicans have been in control since 2010. But right now, I'm feeling as though the governor's staff is on trial and not you because of an incident that happened that I know nothing about and I don't need to know because it's a personnel issue. But I'm really confused as to why this wasn't done, and maybe this is not a question for you, it's a question for the chair or somebody, why this wasn't done through statute prior to this situation arising, if you knew that you guys weren't getting along very well. It's really hard to, I mean, I've worked with bosses that I disliked to the point where I had to either leave my job or move to a different department. So I'm really confused as to why it's coming up now and why I just don't understand what oversight's doing when we could.
That was the date of the meeting.
October, okay, so.
It's not been that long.
It's been long enough for legislation. I mean, did you see the pistol permit go through? So, okay, I'm just confused, and I needed to get that out of my system to understand what's actually happening here. I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to understand what we're trying to do.
Representative Dahl, I think that'd be classified more as a comment. And what we'll do is we will have follow-up meetings on this. This is not the only meeting we're going to have regarding this. And as I think I heard Representative McNeely whisper over there, it is relatively recent. This is a newly formed committee. It takes time to schedule these things and get them on the books. And, really what we would like to see is this be an inspiration to go into a fact-finding mission on how this and exactly the questions you're asking. How did this happen? Why did it get to this point? And how can we prevent it from going forward and happening in the future? So I think you're raising really good questions that is exactly the point of why this committee was formed. And so thank you for those. Representative Cervania, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, so much. I'd like to ask two questions in regards to roles and expectation, communication to you, and then also the infrastructure of SBI. So I'm not going to make this political. I'm very concerned for the people of North Carolina and the structure of what happened with this situation. Typically, you're provided in the beginning of your position expectations of what they want to see your office to achieve, I would think. It's unclear to me, as you've discussed, who you are accountable for. Unfortunately, I haven't read your checks and balances statute, but when you started your position, it sounds like in 2016, were there touch points on how you're doing, what the expectations are, how you need to progress into the future?
So when I was sworn in July of 2016, there were no express directions given to me by Governor McCrory at the time. There wasn't. And so when Governor Cooper assumed office in January of 2017, the chief of staff and I met generally, but there were no, again, I think the expectations by both administrations is that the SBI understands its role in law enforcement and it should pursue it with integrity and with innovation. So no, ma'am, no one told me you have to do this.
So follow-up, Chair?
Recognize for a follow-up.
So between the time of 2020 or 2016 and then the first meeting that you had where the governor requested you to resign, you had no indication that this was to be, like that was the environment that you were in?
Well, I would recall back, I don't remember the exact time, but there have been, to be fair, there have been 2 allegations of racial discrimination. One that dates back to around 2020, and again, I can't go into the specifics of that, but and then the one that caused her to ask for my resignation. And in the one in 2020, again, it was a very, I felt like there were people in the room. There was a current DPS secretary, and then 3 or 4 of their lawyers, and my lawyer, and her, and the chief was very upset, and I would say she was very mad at me, and I let her go on with her statement, and then I made my statement. And again, I knew then, and I knew now, that I had done nothing for her to ask for my resignation. And in that first meeting in 2020, approximately, she was so mad, I was certain if she could have fired me, she would have. And later in a subsequent meeting, I said, "You were so mad, I think you could have fired me." And she didn't deny it. And so I know at that meeting and at the subsequent meetings, I had done nothing for her to fire me over. And I strongly believe nothing for which I should have been asked to resign.
Follow-up?
Recognize for a follow-up. Actually, Representative Cervania, what I'm going to do, I made a commitment to this committee that if we went over an hour in our next meeting, that we would take a short bathroom break and time for them to grab water. And I made that commitment to staff and everyone else. So what we're going to do, we are going to recess for about 3 minutes, just time for everybody to grab a drink of water. And when we come back, we will resume with your follow-up, that commitment. Thank you. Committee is hereby in recess.
Is that where you want your alignment to be?
Well, thank you for the question. And first, a point of clarification, the lab in 2014 was separated from us, so, and they do exceptional work. I appreciate your points there, but we'd welcome you at the SBI headquarters anytime. So I would tell you that I go to 2 meetings a year with my counterparts across the country, and I would tell you that they're benchmarking us. We're not benchmarking them. They are impressed with some of the things that we're doing, things like BETA, the Center for the Study of Use of Force. So they are, but I would tell you that most of the approaches I'm familiar with, they are independent. You take a look at State Law Enforcement Division in South Carolina. Mark Keel is completely independent, that agency. Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, David Roush, same thing. So I would say most of the people that we benchmark with, it's my understanding from afar that they are independent. They aren't a part of DPS. Now, the one exception might be Virginia State Police, And the state police, their investigative division is within the state police. So they have the state patrol, and then they have what they call CID, Criminal Investigations Division. So, but I don't want to make this sound too bold, but people respect the SBI around the country. They know that that we're leaders for the most part. We're not followers. We'll go out there and lean into something.
Thank you so much, Director Schurmeier, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. And Representative Arp, you are recognized for a series of questions.
Thank you, Director Schurmeier.
Yes.
What troubles me most is this intimidation that you alluded to. As an independent law enforcement, as was talking with my colleague, the public trust rests on that independence there. What I think I heard you say is that you were asked to tender your resignation before the EEOC investigation was even commenced. Is that true?
That is correct.
You were asked for your resignation before any due process or any, because there's a very defined process for those complaints, and you were asked for your resignation.
That is correct. In fact, I would tell you the October 3rd meeting, it was an hour and a half long. I remember it quite well. I was still feeling the pain from major surgery, but I looked at both the chief of staff and the general counsel, and I said, you both are lawyers, so you're going to understand what I say when I say, you're asking me to resign without due process. I'm at least entitled to some form of due process here. So I did bring that up at the first meeting.
And what did your general counsel advise you on this matter?
My general counsel?
Yes. And I won't, if you would, please add the names, because I'm getting confused. You're saying your meeting on that day was with the chief of staff and the general counsel?
For the governor.
For the governor. And those people are?
Kristi Jones and Eric Fletcher.
Ms. Jones is the
chief of staff.
And Mr. Fletcher is the general counsel.
For the governor, yes.
And the advice from your general counsel in this matter?
Well, sir, our relationship isn't what it should be, and so I really didn't seek her advice. She was gone that week. In fact, both the lawyers for the SBI were gone that particular week. Normally that doesn't happen.
Director Schurmeier, that's not functioning properly. When your general counsel, who does your general counsel work for?
Well, we had a debate about that, sir, because I felt like at times I would go into these tense meetings and I was there by myself, and we talked about that. Who do you work for? And I made the argument, you work for me. She said I work for the director's office, and that's who I am. And yeah, we'll go periods of time where we don't talk.
Is it fair to say that you believe that the relationship and split loyalties is affecting proper functioning of an independent agency? Or you can answer that.
I think I've been there for almost 7 years. I think there is some split loyalty.
Thank you. Representative Chesser, did you have a follow-up question? Recognized for a brief question.
Well, I don't know about a brief question, but a couple brief questions.
A series.
So, Mr. Director, thank you for being here again. Just to build off of what my colleagues have started here, I think at least on this side of the table here, we discovered a few nuggets that have stuck in our heads, and we're just going to start pulling strings, if you don't mind.
Yes.
With respect to your general counsel, not the governor's, you've made reference to personnel issues, which I know you can't get into solely, but you talked about your general counsel being present there. Is it her role to represent you as the department head in those?
Yes, sir.
And do you believe in those two cases she is representing you?
She was silent through it all.
I'm sorry?
She was silent through it all.
Okay. And then the two instances where you were asked to resign, you said that you believe you made her aware, and then you made reference to the conversations about who she works for. Are those conversations documented in any way where we can see them, or are they going to be, because I know you said there's some debate, there's some argument about who said what and what was said. Is there any way for us to be able to verify these conversations?
There were some emails that I sent. There was an email exchange that I had with her surrounding the comment. She was reminded she worked for the governor, and there was a difference in recollection. I thought I was pretty sure she referenced somebody else than who she admitted to referencing. So there is an exchange there.
One final question. Just my experience in law enforcement again and with attorneys and such. If an attorney does not work directly with or is not representing someone that they personally work with or directly with the person that they're supposed to represent. So if they're not general counsel, but they work for someone else, would that not be considered a conflict of interest and then lead to a recusal under normal circumstances?
Yes, sir.
But
Yes, sir.
it didn't in this circumstance because you actually tried to have her removed. We never even got into why you tried to have her removed. I'm not asking that now. But that was your prerogative, as you stated earlier, and that was blocked for budgetary purposes, according to your testimony, by the governor. So you had an issue with personnel. You chose to remove someone who you plainly state you have a personnel issue with, and the governor blocked that process. Or the governor did not allow you to facilitate your authority in that.
Well, here's my recollection of it. After the first series of tense meetings with the governor's staff, after that all cooled down, I went to the chief of staff and I said, is there a way to find her another position somewhere else? And the chief of staff promised, let me look and see. And several months transpired, and then she came back and said because of the pay range, they just couldn't find anything out there. And but what I was trying to do is be kind, because I think I had every opportunity to just say, because of this and your exempt status, you know, that we just need to part ways, but I didn't. I sought a kinder way through the governor's office to try and find her a place. Sir, it's been difficult. It has.
I can imagine.
You know, this is a tough job, but when you got someone who's there to support you legally and be there at tense meetings and have your back, and we actually talked about that, whether she had my back or not, and I just didn't think she did.
Thank you, Representative. And given the time constraints we're looking at, we've got a handful of people here in the queue, so I would ask we will recognize you a final time, but if we could keep those brief so we have the director here, and if he had any final comments, and then we just keep those relatively brief, that would be great. Representative Dahl, you're recognized for a final statement.
Did the thank you, Mr. Chair. Did the person who accused you of this, did they take that complaint to the EEOC or take it anywhere? I'm just trying to find, all I really want to know is, was it just posed to you, or was it posed to another, was it posed somewhere else so that?
I'm told it's a personnel matter.
Representative Quick, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You got to my question, a part of my question earlier when you demonstrated through your answer that you had some supervisory authority over your general counsel, and you could have done some things that you chose not to do. Is that fair to say that?
That is fair. Yes, sir.
And, Mr. Chair, I thank you for and I'm waiting with anticipation with your closing comments as to the second part of this, because there is a second part to this story, another side to this story, not in any way, causing any disparagement upon what you have shared with us. And I just wanted to share my final comment that as I sat here and listened to this testimony, a lot of this seems personal to some degree, and it's a lot of change for what seems to be at some degree personal. We're talking about changing the structure of a state agency for what, at least on some level, seems to be some personal things. And I don't know that you have to respond to that.
Reverend, I appreciate your point, and I'd go back to this, Mr. Chair and members. The exempt positions, as they're currently structured, allows for the intrusion of politics beyond what I think we need to have. If we're having to negotiate with any party, then it allows that party to insert people that would otherwise be sensitive or favorable to them. So when it comes to the exempt positions, I would argue to this body and beyond that those need to be positions that are granted to the director, and I'm speaking for future. And you need to hold that director accountable, and there needs to be checks and balances. Again, this is not a king or a queen. This is there needs to be accountability, but entrust them with the authority to make those positions accountable to them and not to a split accountability.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Representative McNeely, you're recognized for a short final statement.
Well, first off, Mr. Director, I appreciate you coming here today, and I appreciate you being honest with us and blunt and explaining some of the situations going on. And I've always been told it's hard to tell the difference between an alligator and a crocodile. They say there's more teeth in a crocodile's mouth, but it's usually too late by the time you figure that out. And it looks like you've been swimming with crocodiles and alligators, and I don't know if you figured out which one's which, but neither one of them seem to be doing you any good. I think it'd be mighty tough to take over a position, but yet have no control of your upper management, which is where you've been. And I totally agree with you that if you're going to make somebody the so-called name director, they ought to be able to direct. And I don't think you've been given that latitude. And I do feel like you're the odd button on a coat, and they'll just soon replace you with a normal button that looked like the rest of them. And I think that's happened also. So, you know, Lady Justice wears a blindfold so that she can't pick and choose what she thinks looks right or wrong. It's the balance of the scales that choose that. And I think, unfortunately, Lady Justice has peeked underneath her blindfold when it come to you and how to run our state's SBI, especially for the last bit. and I apologize for that from the legislature. So I appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Whether it's an alligator or it's a crocodile, McNeely wears shoes made out of both of them. Right? I've seen it. Director, do you have any follow-up, any closing statements you would like to make?
I do.
You're recognized.
Thank you, sir. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation occupies a unique position in law enforcement in our state. We investigate cases involving public corruption and complicated and sensitive matters like officer-involved shootings. As such, the public must have confidence that we are able to complete our mission independently and without political interference of any kind. I ask you again to grant us full independence and keep politics out of the business of the state's premier investigative agency. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the former Governor, Pat McCrory, and this body for entrusting me with the privilege of a lifetime. It has been an epic journey, and I thank you, and God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director. And Director Schurmeier, you've shown immense courage coming here today, and I commend that, putting potential risk out on the table and risking that backlash to protect the integrity and the independence of this department, the SBI. I want to thank you so much for that. And as it was mentioned by a couple of folks, there were some folks mentioned in this meeting, and we want to give them an opportunity to respond and tell their side of it as well. And we will certainly be reaching out to do that to people in the governor's staff, especially those who were named in this meeting. But you've raised some remarkable questions about what we can do, what more we can do to make this a more independent and efficient agency. And I want to let you know that we will begin taking steps, whether it's in language or in the budget language, however we do it, to make sure these things fall under the purview that they need to and that are truly independent. But we look forward as a committee. I think that's why this committee was formed, to answer these types of questions that you're raising. And it certainly is obvious to me that there was potential for an undercurrent from an outside force to either undermine or influence what you were trying to do at the department. And we look forward to getting to the bottom of that and working with everyone involved to do so. So with that being said, I'd like to say this can conclude our business. Committee adjourned.